Roles were created for people who want to queue up and perform a very specific job. Unfortunately, nowadays, it seems like everyone can do everyone else's job just as well, if not better, than they can do their own. The devs say this is all in the name of playmaking opportunity and player choice, but unfortunately, I feel like this is where this game has really gone to shit. Every role doesn't need to be able to do another role's job, and new characters don't need the attributes or perks or none of that of opposite roles to feel new and fresh and exciting. I believe in order for all roles to feel impactful and fun, we all need to universally sacrifice something, which means that you need to be good at your role-specific job, and that means getting rid of this babying culture that we're currently in. Hello and welcome to the channel. In today's video, I will be going over what I believe those specific reasons that you queue up for those roles that you love so much are, as well as go over some general role specific topics. Now first up, we're going to talk about tank. Now when I imagine a tank, a few things come to mind. Firstly, are they the biggest thing on the field? Next, are they the hardest to kill? Not necessarily invincible, but does it take a little bit of coordination to actually get the elimination off on the tank? After that, do they have high threat potential? Now I'm not saying the ability to wipe the entire field clean, but are they a physical threat? Do they pose an actual threat on their own? And then lastly, can they take space and hold it effectively? Because if you can do one or the other, you're essentially useless if you can't do them both. Now personally, I am a tank main, and I take pride in a lot of things that come with being a tank. A few of those things are that, like, one, you're the front line for your team. You're the one mitigating the damage. You're the one taking the brunt of it all. And, with that, there should be a little pride in that. You are essentially your team's protector. You have the ability to be the leader, the coordinator, the one that the comp is based around. You also have the largest health pool, the largest armor, due to being the biggest thing on the field. So, to me, these are just some qualities of a tank that personally I enjoy and that make me queue for it. I hear this discussion going around a lot too, like, what a tank should be. Some people say raid boss, some people say it's a beefy DPS, or whatever the case may be. Personally, I do believe that it should be more of a light-hearted raid boss, and what I mean by that is, they have good damage, good survivability, they're not necessarily easy to move. Essentially all the aspects of an actual raid boss, just you don't have the absolute killing power that a raid boss would have. But I think the biggest thing to me also would be the fact that it should require some sort of team coordination to eliminate you. I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that at some moments in the games, DPS and support can feel just as tanky, if not tankier than tanks. And it's kind of unfair to me, just considering the fact that both of these roles also still have 2 members. So if you're going to reduce tanks numbers to 1, yeah, a lot of tanks have been reworked to better suit the fact that they lost one other tank. It still sometimes feels like it's not enough, especially considering DPS and supports have only been getting pretty decent buffs, whereas the tanks have been reworked and buffed and nerfed so much because they really don't know what to do with them. At the end of the day, you are essentially your team's final boss, which at times could be first boss because you are in the front line and whatnot, but that's the type of mentality that you have to have. You are the one-man army, you are the final boss, you are the biggest, the baddest, the strongest, and tanks should feel that way as well. Next up, we're going to talk about tank mobility, because I feel like it's a very hard thing to balance, because naturally, if you don't have the mobility to run away or get a health pack or go back to your team or whatever the case may be, you have to make up for that with survivability, i.e. Orisa, Roadhog, Malga. And at times, as everyone knows, those tanks can feel unkillable. As everyone knows, it's not fun playing against someone that feels like they can't die, but we're at this point now where there's so many broken abilities or just confused roles and whatnot that these new characters have to have these abilities in order to be relevant. For tanks, unfortunately, if they don't have mobility, they have to have insane survivability. If they don't have survivability, they have some sort of insane mobility. Whether or not a tank should be a main tank or an off tank or have the abilities of either or is a really hard topic to discuss, just because, main tank, off tank, those are terminologies from a bygone era. Those are terminologies that you would use in 6v6, but now every tank has been reworked or buffed to compensate the fact that they lost that one tank that, while they sort of in a way do have their own identity, it's harder to make the older tanks more relevant, i.e. Reinhardt or Roadhog, until they completely reworked him for a long period of time. Even Winston somewhat can struggle here and there depending on what's meant and what's not. I would say that the main tanks nowadays that do get picked, they get picked because of their survivability. Malga or Orisa or Roadhog, they just don't die. And what I will say is that when those three aren't getting picked, it is the more mobile tanks, Diva, Winston, the more quote unquote off tanks. Sigma also is a pretty consistent tank, but that's just because Sigma's in his own little world. He's really good at mitigating and just denying damage and stuff like that. So he's always a pretty liable and a reliable pick, especially on certain maps. It's a really unfortunate thing because if at any point in time they want to make or design a more main tank type of tank, that tank has to be release broken or else it won't be picked. Because the problem with picking a tank that doesn't have mobility is that it's pretty hard to synchronize with your team. And again, this is all just opinion, but if you aren't synchronizing with your team, or if the enemy team picks a tank that their team can work with better, you're at risk for being reported for throw-in or griefing or whatever the case may be. And again, in this 5v5 format, it is important that you work with your team if you're not using the most broken and unkillable tank. And again, I don't know if I've said this already, but this would be my biggest issue with being the solo tank, the tank in 5v5, is that I'm forced into who I have to play if I want to win, because you have that power, whereas you might not be able to single-handedly win the game for your team. You absolutely could single-handedly lose it. You have to play perfect. You have to play perfect, and if you don't pick the meta tank, your room for error is even smaller. You have to make 0 mistakes, and I cannot stress that enough. And if you put your team and yourself at a disadvantage by picking a tank that's like a B caliber tank or whatever, you're not gonna have a fun time. Last thing I'll say on tanks, and maybe this is like a personal thing, but I feel like with there being only one tank and such a small selection of tanks that you can pick from, and of that category, and even smaller amount that are like reliable picks, no one character should be able to completely counter you. Now, they have been doing good at, reducing that, like, Roadhog and Ana, but I do feel like still rock, paper, scissors, it's not going to change within the tank roles, but I shouldn't be able to just get completely outclassed by one DPS pick or one support pick. Now, maybe that's just me, but I just don't think that's something that a tank should have to deal with, especially not right now. Now, next up, we're going to talk about supports. Now, to me, supports honestly have two main focuses, right? Heal your team and provide unique utility to your team composition. Now, I know a lot of you aren't going to like that, but that to me is what it means to support. You don't like to being called healers, so I'm not going to call you a healer because you do more than heal. While that is one of your main things that you do, I'm not going to sugarcoat it either. You heal and you support. You give utility, you give resources, and you heal. But with that being said, you should take pride in that, because we cannot play the game without you. We will die without you. Anyone from both teams plays the games because supports allows us to. Supports, as soon as you start talking about nerfing support damage, they'll be like, oh, what do you want us to be, a sitting duck? No and yes. Like, I want you more as a glass cannon. While it's important to be able to defend yourself, you shouldn't be able to 1v1 outside your role. And there are numerous supports right now who, and they're doing better with it now, but who at times feel like they could completely 1v2 some DPS and win. You're not the combat role, but you have combat capability. A lot of people will blame supports for crying about it or whatever the case may be, and then that being the reason why they get the buffs. And while I do think that supports are the most babied role, I think it's just because tanks and DPS aren't treating them like they should be treating them. You are a priority target, so you should have the mobility to compensate for that, but at the same time, your team should be treating you like the resource that you are. Unfortunately, over time, team communication has declined and whatnot, so you're often left out to dry, which is why I'm okay with the supports having the mobility to disengage as well as I believe they should. But supports above all roles don't need to do everything. They don't need to be able to do everything. They should be able to depend on their DPS, on their tank, to keep them safe. I believe that the devs have designed the craziest concepts, given them to supports, and we're at this point now where we can't turn back, because with these newest releases, Lifeweaver, Kiriko, even back when Baptiste came out, they're at this point of no return where the only way to fix what they've done is to completely remove these abilities, and they're not going to do that. At the end of the day, when you queue for support, you are the lifesaver. Now, when you queue for certain roles, like I've been saying, those roles come with certain responsibilities. And if any role were to have to communicate, I think that the supports have to take the brunt of that more than anybody else, because just based on sheer map placement, where you're typically placed, you can see more than anybody else. If someone's flanking, or if someone needs healing and they're not in your LOS, whatever the case may be, like, you need to be able to communicate that with your team. I don't know how many times, I personally experienced it where, I'm running from a fight because I think we're going to lose it, but little did I know that my Zenyatta had his ultimate and it could have flipped the fight, or the inverse of that. I thought we could have took a fight. So me as a tank, I go in or whatever, and my Moira didn't have any healing, or, my Ana didn't have cooldown, like, you know what I mean? So being able to vocalize what you do and don't have drastically changes your fight engagement and, the things that your team can withstand. And to the people who don't have a microphone, I'm not saying go spend your last dollar buying a mic, but there's ping systems. At the bare minimum, you can ping a flanker, or you ping someone on high ground, and then it's just up to your team at that point to try and engage them. I think at the end of the day, just us as a community need to understand the clout and status that a support character brings to the team, and that a support character has. We ultimately need to protect them. We need to safeguard them, because they just bring so much value and utility to the team. And then also, this is a little bit of a side tangent, but I feel like there are a few health packs around certain maps that are a little unnecessary, but I'll leave that for another day. Last, we're going to talk about the DPS. Now, when I imagine DPS, or I envision a DPS character, right, I think, do they have the most kill potential, and do they have the most damage? Now, if you queue for DPS, I personally think that you should take pride in knowing the fact that you secure the eliminations, you secure the objectives, right? You ultimately get the kills, you win the fights. And because I have this mentality, to me, it's very easy to balance DPS. The only reason why it's hard right now is because some tanks are unkillable and some supports can do way too much damage. All you need to do is fix the survivability of certain tanks and fix the damage of certain supports, and DPS will naturally be buffed. Now, anyone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but if a DPS seems to be under or overperforming, they typically have buffed or nerfed the HP or damage, and that seems like it's been resolving the issue over the history. Not for any other role though. All the other roles have had to get reworks, abilities changed entirely, and I'm talking about, both support and tank here, but not the DPS. The DPS, they typically just get a damage or health reduction or boost, and that seems to fix the problem. I personally believe the DPS have the widest skill expression, largely because of how many different types of DPS that there are, but also because there's two of you, and the combinations that you can make are essentially vast. Like, there's so many that you can come up with. It's also like an always changing role. Like, if there's typically a pick on the enemy team that needs a counter, you can typically switch one of your DPS and fully shut out that character. No matter the meta, no matter who the tank picks, whatever, if you're good enough at a specific DPS, you can impact the game and tip the odds in your team's favor if you're good enough. Take pride in that, because you have options. You have playmaking opportunity. Tanks right now don't. Supports really don't. But DPS, you do. At the end of the day, you are the playmakers. To close this video out, I'd just like to say that, again, these are just my thoughts as a casual player. They should not be taken as gospel. My thought process here isn't to make everyone suffer and have a miserable time. It's literally just thinking of how all three roles can have fun at the same exact time, while also feeling like they're having some sort of impact on the game. If you have any comment at all that you would like to add, any opinion that you want to share, something that I said that you agree with or disagree with, just comment down below and let me know. Thank you guys for watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video.